The magic happens in the silence. It's not the kind of silence you find in a library or a church. It's an electric silence. A low thrum of potential energy humming from a half-dozen metal boxes, their little lights blinking like a miniature city at night. This is my shack, my sanctuary, my spare bedroom that my wife, Sarah, has generously allowed me to convert into a temple of arcane communication. And tonight, the gods of the ionosphere were smiling upon me. The air crackled. Not with lightning, but with a voice, faint and laced with static, pulled from the ether by a simple strand of copper wire. CQ, CQ. This is Victor Papa 8, Sierra Lima, India. Listening. My heart hammered against my ribs. VP8SLI. South Sandwich Islands. A desolate, wind-scoured scrap of volcanic rock and penguin real estate thousands of miles south of everything. A de-expedition. These are the rock stars of the ham radio world, guys who spend a fortune to haul gear to the middle of nowhere just so nerds like me can get a new country in our logbooks. My fingers danced across the dials of my transceiver, my hand hovering over the microphone switch. My call sign. FM. Whiskey 9 Foxtrot Mike. It sounds so official, so cool. The reality is just Frank Miller, IT project manager, lord of the server room, vanquisher of forgotten passwords. But in here, in this chair, I was an explorer. Whiskey 9 Foxtrot Mike, I whispered into the mic, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. You're 5-9 into Illinois. 5-9. Over. A burst of static, and then clear as day. W9FM, solid copy. You're a 5-7 here. Thanks for the call. 73. That was it. The whole exchange took maybe 15 seconds. He gave me a signal report. I gave him one. 73 is ham speak for best wishes. The QSO, the contact, was complete. I logged it, a grin splitting my face. To a normal person, this is the audio equivalent of watching paint dry. To me, it was like hitting a walk-off home run in the World Series. I had reached out with a whisper of radio waves, powered by the new antenna I'd spent all last weekend installing, and touched one of the most remote places on Earth. The antenna. My God, she was a thing of beauty. A Hustler 6B TV vertical. A sleek, 25-foot aluminum spear pointed defiantly at the sky from a modest 10-foot mast in my backyard. I'd dug the hole, mixed the concrete, and torqued every last bolt myself. It was my Statue of Liberty, my Eiffel Tower. It was practically invisible, a thin silver line against the backdrop of the majestic oak tree behind it. Harmless. Elegant, even. It was the key that unlocked the world from my suburban prison cell in Pleasant Valley Meadows. Floating on the high of my Antarctic conquest, I shut down the rig and headed downstairs. The smell of garlic bread told me Sarah was making lasagna. A perfect end to a perfect day. She was standing at the kitchen island, not looking at the oven, but at a single beige envelope held between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a dead cockroach. "It's here," she said, her voice flat. "What's here?" "Did my jerky subscription arrive early?" I asked, grabbing a glass from the cabinet. "Worse," she said, sliding the envelope across the granite countertop. "It's from her." I didn't need to ask who her was. The Pleasant Valley Meadows Homeowners Association logo was printed in the corner, a tasteful, soulless little leaf motif. President. Brenda Donaldson. My stomach did a slow, leaden roll. No, not already. I just put it up. She patrols on Sundays, Frank. You know this. The compliance cruiser was doing laps all afternoon. I think she times them with a stopwatch. The compliance cruiser was Brenda's golf cart, a silent electric chariot from which she dispensed judgment upon the neighborhood. I tore the envelope open. The paper was thick, expensive. It felt important, which only made it more insulting. Official notice of violation. It read in a crisp, sans serif font. Dear resident of 112 Arbor Lane, this letter serves as a formal notice that your property is in violation of the Pleasant Valley Meadows Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, CCNRs. An inspection on October 12, 2025, revealed the following non-compliance. Article 6, Section 4B, Unauthorized Structures. Installation of an unapproved structural modification, to wit, a metallic radio antenna and associated mast, in the rear yard. As per the governing documents, you have 14 days from the date of this notice to rectify this violation. Failure to comply will result in further action, including daily fines and potential liens placed upon your property, in order to maintain our community's aesthetic harmony. Sincerely, Brenda Donaldson, President, PVM HOA, Aesthetic Harmony. The two most terrifying words in the English language. I read it again. To wit? Who says to wit? It was a declaration of war written on high-gloss cardstock. My beautiful antenna, my gateway to the globe, was an unapproved structural modification. I'm going to talk to her, I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. Sarah put a hand on my arm. Are you sure that's a good idea? Remember what happened to the Henderson's garden gnome? The Henderson gnome incident was the stuff of local legend. A small, cheerful ceramic fellow with a fishing pole deemed seasonal decor displayed outside of the approved seasonal window. It ended with fines and a forced removal. The gnome was now, reportedly, in a witness protection program in Henderson's basement. I have to, I insisted. This is different. This is a federally regulated hobby. She can't just ban it. I was full of righteous indignation and, as it would turn out, a whole lot of misplaced optimism. I found her, of course, 3 houses down, on her knees in the Petersons' front yard. She wasn't praying. She was holding a small plastic ruler against a blade of grass. Mr. Peterson stood on his porch, looking like a man awaiting a diagnosis. Brenda, I said, walking up her perfectly manicured walkway. She looked up, a thin, satisfied smile on her face. She was probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could repel small arms fire, and a pastel pink polo shirt tucked neatly into khaki shorts. 3.25 inches, Mark, she announced to Mr. Peterson, ignoring me for a moment. The bylaws state a maximum of 3 inches. I'll give you till Tuesday to address it. She stood, brushing a non-existent speck of dirt from her knee. Frank, to what do I owe the pleasure? I got your letter, I said, holding up the beige envelope. Ah, yes, the apparatus. She said the word like it was something you'd find growing in a petri dish. It's a ham radio antenna, Brenda. It's a hobby protected by the FCC. The over-the-air reception devices rule. She held up a perfectly manicured hand, stopping me cold. Frank, I'm familiar with the OTARD rule. It applies to antennas for receiving video or internet services. Your metal stick does neither. It transmits, and our bylaws, which you agreed to when you purchased your lovely home, are very clear about unauthorized structures. But it's practically invisible. It's not an eyesore. It's a thin pole. If we allow one antenna, Frank, what's next? She lowered her voice, as if sharing a terrible secret. What's next? Windmills? Personal cell towers? Statues of gargoyles? It's a slippery slope. A very slippery, unaesthetic slope that leads directly to chaos and plummeting property values. I stared at her, dumbfounded. She had somehow leaped from my harmless hobby to a neighborhood overrun with Gothic monstrosities. There was no reasoning with this woman. She didn't operate on logic. She was powered by pure, uncut bureaucracy. So that's it? Just take it down? Within 14 days, she said, her smile never wavering. She patted my arm with a condescending pity. We're a community of standards, Frank. I'm sure you understand. She turned and walked back to the compliance cruiser, which was parked at the curb. As she drove away, its electric motor emitting a faint, judgmental whine, I stood there, defeated. The war hadn't just been declared. The first battle had been fought, and I had been routed. My lasagna was getting cold. The next week was a blur of beige-tinted misery. My first move was to file a formal appeal with the Architectural Review Committee, which sounded grand and official. The reality was a 20-minute Zoom call with Brenda and two women who looked so much like her they could have been clones grown in a lab and raised on a diet of restrictive covenants. Let's call them Brenda 2 and Brenda 3. I made my case. I had charts. I had printouts from the FCC website. I had photos of my antenna taken from every conceivable angle, demonstrating its near invisibility. I talked about its educational value, its importance in emergency communications, its ability to connect people across cultures. They listened with the blank, placid expressions of people waiting for a bus. When I was finished, Brenda, too, unmuted herself. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Miller. We find the structure to be out of compliance with Article 6. And that was that. My appeal was denied in the time it takes to microwave a bag of popcorn. I spent the evenings in my shack, staring at my silent radio. The blinking lights that once seemed so full of promise now just mocked me. The world was out there, whispering on the airwaves, and I was grounded. My magnificent antenna stood in the backyard like a tombstone, a monument to my defeat. One night, drowning my sorrows in a bowl of cereal, I decided to do the one thing I hadn't done yet. Read the entire HOA binder. All of it. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions. All 372 pages of it. Sarah found me at the kitchen table an hour later, surrounded by paper, a glazed look in my eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked, gently prying a page stuck to my forehead. "You look like you're trying to summon a demon." "Worse," I mumbled. "I'm trying to understand the legal framework for approved shrubbery heights." Reading this thing was like taking a bath in beige paint. It was a masterpiece of soul-crushing legalese, a document seemingly designed to strip every last ounce of joy and spontaneity from human existence. There were rules for everything. The precise shade of white for window trim, the maximum allowable brightness for holiday light displays, measured in lumens per square foot, the mandatory interval for pressure washing your driveway. And then I found it. The clause that broke my brain. "Listen to this," I said to Sarah, my voice a hollow echo of its former self. Article 4, Animal Husbandry. No livestock, poultry, or other non-domesticated animals shall be kept, bred, or maintained on any lot, except for a maximum of two pot-bellied pigs, provided they do not exceed 75 pounds each, and are leashed when in common areas. Sarah blinked. "Pot-bellied pigs?" "2 of them!" I exclaimed, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. You can have two 75-pound pigs wallowing in your backyard, but I can't have a single, silent, 25-foot aluminum pole. Who is this rule for? What happened in this neighborhood's dark past that required a specific pot-bellied pig clause? Was there a swine-related incident? A pig uprising of '03? I was losing it. To keep from going completely insane, I started reading the bylaws out loud to her in my most dramatic, over-the-top movie trailer voice. I stood up, puffed out my chest, and lowered my voice. In a world where your trash receptacle cannot be visible from the street for more than 6 hours post-collection, one man will fight for his right to have his recycling bin out until at least 8 p.m. Sarah snorted with laughter. You're an idiot. But I'm your idiot, I said, taking a bow. I flipped to another page. This summer, get ready for Article 11, Fences and Enclosures. All wood fences must be stained with an approved semi-transparent stain from the official PVM color palette. See Appendix C for color swatches. The thrill, the suspense. Will he choose Valley Cedar or Meadow Oak? She was wiping tears from her eyes now. Stop, you're going to make me pee. And as she laughed, a gear clicked into place in my head. An idea began to form. It was a tiny, stupid, gloriously petty little spark. I looked at the binder. I looked at the silent radio in the other room. The bylaws forbid my antenna. They forbid nuisance noise from loud parties or barking dogs. But they said nothing about broadcasting. They couldn't stop me from talking. And the FCC, my supposed nemesis in Brenda's eyes, actually had very clear rules for low-power FM broadcasting. The kind that's perfectly legal without a license, as long as you stay under a certain power threshold. The kind used by real estate agents for drive-by house tours, or by churches to broadcast services to the parking lot. The kind with a range of, say, a quarter mile. Just about the size of Pleasant Valley Meadows. The spark ignited into a full-blown bonfire of malicious compliance. "Honey," I said, a slow, evil grin spreading across my face. "I have a terrible, wonderful idea." The next day, my despair was replaced with a giddy sense of purpose. I spent my lunch break on Amazon. For $49.99, I ordered a C. Crane FM Transmitter 2. It was marketed as a way to send music from your computer to any radio in your house. The reviews were glowing. "Great for our drive-in Christmas light show," one said. Perfect. My Christmas was coming early. When it arrived 2 days later, it was smaller than a deck of cards. My weapon of mass disruption was laughably tiny. That evening, after Sarah went to bed, I went into cloak and dagger mode. I crept up into the attic, a place of dust bunnies and forgotten Christmas decorations. I unfurled a simple 30-inch wire antenna that came with the transmitter and taped it to one of the roof beams. Completely invisible from the outside. I ran the thin audio cable down through a closet ceiling and into the shack. The setup was complete. I plugged the transmitter into my laptop's audio jack, connected the attic antenna, and set the broadcast frequency to 88.7 FM, a nice, empty spot on the dial. Then I fired up my audio software and plugged in a cheap microphone. For the next hour, I practiced. I worked on my radio voice, deep, resonant, and full of unearned gravitas. I downloaded a library of free sound effects, a dramatic orchestral sting, the sound of a gavel banging, the rustle of turning pages. The last piece of the puzzle was the branding. I needed a name. A station ID. I leaned into the microphone, cleared my throat, and hit record. Broadcasting from an undisclosed location somewhere within the aesthetically harmonious confines of Pleasant Valley Meadows, I intoned, adding a touch of reverb. You're listening to 88.7 FM WHOA, the voice of the valley. Coming up next, after a word from our non-existent sponsors, a riveting word-for-word exploration of approved fence stain colors. I played it back. It was perfect. It was stupid. It was the best idea I'd ever had. Brenda wanted me off the air? Fine. I'd just have to find a different way to broadcast. The following evening, I waited for the sun to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in colors that were almost certainly not on the approved PVM exterior paint palette. The air in the shack was thick with anticipation. Sarah sat in the corner on an old office chair, chewing on her thumbnail, half horrified, half thrilled by what I was about to do. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered, as if Brenda could hear us. "Absolutely not," I whispered back, which was the honest truth. "But I'm doing it anyway." I had my script ready. For my inaugural broadcast, I needed something truly, profoundly, soul-crushingly boring, something that perfectly encapsulated the spirit of the HOA. I flipped the binder open to Article 7, Mailboxes and Newspaper Receptacles. It was a masterpiece of pointless regulation. I clicked on my on-air sound effect, a classic, satisfying whoosh, and leaned into the microphone. Good evening, Pleasant Valley Meadows, and welcome to the premiere broadcast of WHOA, your official, unofficial source for all things covenant-related. I'm your host, Frank, and tonight, we're talking mailboxes. I cued a dramatic, orchestral sting. Dun dun dun. Sarah clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a giggle. "That's right, folks," I continued, my voice dripping with fake sincerity. "That humble box at the end of your driveway, that silent sentinel of suburbia. But is your sentinel up to code? Let's turn to the sacred texts, shall we? Article 7, Section 3. All mailboxes must be of a design approved by the Architectural Review Committee. A simple start. But wait, there's more. I rustled the pages next to the mic for effect. Approved mailboxes shall be of the T1 or T2 rural style, mounted on a 4x4-inch pressure-treated wooden post. The post must extend 42 inches above the ground. Listeners, I implore you, go outside right now with a tape measure. Are you at 42 inches? Or are you living a lie at 41.5? I took a sip of water, letting the tension build. And the color, oh, the color. Mailboxes and their corresponding posts must be painted a uniform, solid color. Approved colors are black, SKU number 7758, or forest green, SKU number 4829. No exceptions. No festive holiday mailboxes unless submitted for temporary approval no less than 60 days in advance. And the flag, the little red flag for your outgoing mail? The flag must be red. It doesn't give a SKU number for red, which I can only assume was a clerical oversight that will be rectified at the next meeting. It cannot be crimson. It cannot be scarlet. It must be red. I was in the zone. I went on for a full 15 minutes, dissecting every line of the mailbox bylaw with the meticulous attention of a scholar analyzing Shakespeare. I ended the segment with a thoughtful, and so, as you drift off to sleep tonight, ask yourself, is my mailbox truly harmonious? This is WHOA, the voice of the valley, signing off. I cut the feed and ripped off my headphones, my heart pounding. "Well?" I asked Sarah. She just shook her head, a massive grin on her face. "You are the weirdest man I have ever met, and I have never been more attracted to you." That's when I saw it. Through the window, my next-door neighbor, Dave, a good guy who mostly kept to himself, was getting out of his minivan. He stopped halfway to his door, cocked his head, and looked back at his car with an expression of profound confusion. He'd heard me. It was working. The broadcasts became a nightly ritual. Tuesday was an in-depth report on Article 9, roofing materials, complete with dramatic readings of shingle warranty information. On Wednesday, I did a special expose on the infamous pot-bellied pig clause, featuring an interview with a local swine law expert, me using a voice modulator to sound like a gravelly-voiced old farmer. By Friday, the other shoe dropped. I was in the middle of a particularly riveting segment on driveway crack maintenance. Hairline fractures of less than 1/4 inch are permissible, but anything wider is a gateway to suburban decay. When I saw the flashing red and blue lights paint a strobing pattern across my living room wall, my blood ran cold. "Sarah," I called out. "Cops!" I killed the broadcast and met them at the door, trying to arrange my face into a look of pleasant, law-abiding confusion. There were 2 of them. One was older, with a mustache that had seen things, and a weary look in his eyes. The other was a rookie, young, and trying very hard to look serious. "Frank Miller?" the older one asked. His name tag read, "Miller. A good omen? A terrible omen?" "That's me, Officer Miller. No relation, I assume?" I said, trying for a bit of levity. He did not smile. "Sir, we've received a complaint from one of your neighbors. A unique complaint." He sighed, a deep, profound exhalation that spoke of a long career filled with bizarre suburban disputes. "Are you by any chance broadcasting dramatic readings of your HOA bylaws over an FM radio frequency?" I decided to play it straight. "Is that illegal, officer?" Officer Miller rubbed the bridge of his nose, right between his tired eyes. "Well, that's the thing. We called the sergeant. He called a guy who knows about FCC stuff. And technically, no. Your transmitter is well within the legal power limits for unlicensed Part 15 broadcasting. The content isn't obscene. You're not slandering anyone by name. You're just reading from a public document." The rookie, whose name tag read Davis, coughed to cover up a smile. "It's a very theatrical reading, though, sir. The complainant, a Ms. Brenda Donaldson, was quite agitated. Mentioned something about weaponized bureaucracy." "She would know," I muttered. "Look, Mr. Miller," the veteran cop said, leaning in slightly. "I get it. I live in an HOA, too. They wanted to fine me because my basketball hoop was a non-approved shade of orange. I get it, but this is annoying. Your neighbor is annoyed. It's tying up our time. Can you please just not?" I stood my ground, channeling the spirit of every revolutionary who ever dumped tea into a harbor. "With all due respect, officers, the document I'm reading from is the very reason I can't pursue my harmless, federally recognized hobby. This isn't a prank. I consider this a form of peaceful, well-articulated, and I'd like to think, entertaining protest." Officer Miller stared at me for a long moment. I could see a war going on behind his eyes. The part of him that was a cop wanted me to stop causing trouble. But the part of him that was a homeowner with a non-compliant basketball hoop was giving me a silent, spiritual fist bump. He finally sighed again. "All right. We can't make you stop. Just try to keep the dramatic stings to a minimum after 10 p.m. Have a good night, sir." They turned and walked back to their cruiser. As they drove away, I saw the rookie, Davis, finally lose his composure and burst out laughing. It was a massive victory. The law was on my side. Brenda was powerless to stop me. Over the weekend, the neighborhood began to change. I noticed more people sitting in their cars in their driveways around 8 p.m., a little before my show started. I saw a few glares from the houses with immaculate, Brenda-approved landscaping. But then other things started happening. On Saturday morning, I found a six-pack of a local craft IPA on my porch with a sticky note on it. For the voice of the valley. On Sunday, there was a bag of gourmet coffee beans. On Monday, a folded piece of paper was tucked under my doormat. I opened it. In block letters, it read, "Article 5, Trash Receptacles. Hilarious. Keep going." It seemed I had started a movement. The resistance was small, anonymous, and fueled by craft beer. But it was real. Pleasant Valley Meadows was dividing into two camps. The loyalists who believed in aesthetic harmony above all else, and the rebels who were tired of being told their basketball hoop was the wrong shade of orange. And I, Frank Miller, IT guy and antenna enthusiast, was their voice. The war was escalating. Brenda might have lost the battle of the broadcast, but she was not about to lose the war. Unable to silence me through legal channels, she switched tactics. She began a campaign of overwhelming, soul-crushing administrative attrition. My house became her personal Area 51, subject to constant microscopic surveillance. The beige envelopes started arriving daily. Monday's notice, violation of Article 5, Section 2A, trash receptacles. Receptacles were placed at the curb for collection at 6:50 a.m. Bylaws stipulate receptacles may not be placed earlier than 7 o'clock a.m. on the day of collection. 10 minutes. She got me by 10 minutes. Tuesday's notice, violation of Article 8, Section 1C, lawn and garden maintenance. A single specimen of the weed species Taraxacum officinale, common dandelion, was observed in the front lawn during a routine inspection. They ticketed me for one dandelion. 1. Wednesday's notice was the big one, violation of Article X, Section 5, driveways and walkways. A transverse crack in the concrete driveway apron, measuring approximately 18 inches in length and 1/3 of an inch in width, has been identified. This constitutes a structural and aesthetic deficiency requiring immediate remediation. Each notice came with a fine. $25 for the trash can, $50 for the dandelion, and a whopping $200 citation for the driveway crack, with a threat of $100 a day until it was repaired. Brenda was trying to bleed me dry, one petty infraction at a time. But what she failed to realize was that she wasn't just sending me fines, she was sending me show prep. That night, HOA was on fire. "Good evening, rebels, patriots, and dandelion sympathizers," I began, my voice smooth and confident. "We have some breaking news tonight from the front lines of the war on aesthetic disharmony. I hold in my hand 3 official communiques from the Office of the President. Let's start with tonight's feature presentation, The Case of the Contraband Dandelion, a Tale of Botanical Tyranny." I read the violation notice verbatim, then launched into a full-blown Ken Burns-style documentary about the history of the dandelion, its cheerful resilience, its value to pollinators. I played sad violin music in the background. I even did a dramatic reenactment of Brenda discovering the offending flower, complete with gasps of horror and villainous monologuing. The driveway crack, however, was a real problem. That was a fine I couldn't ignore. I had to get it fixed. I did a quick search online and called the first concrete repair company with decent reviews. The next morning, a battered-looking pickup truck that was definitely not an approved commercial vehicle color rumbled to a stop in front of my house. Large man with a barrel chest, a thick neck, and hands like cinder blocks heaved himself out of the driver's side. His t-shirt read, "Sal's Concrete. We fix your cracks." He walked up the driveway, kicked at the crack with a steel-toed boot, and grunted. "Yep, that's a crack, all right. HOA getting on you?" "You have no idea," I said. He looked at me, then at the house, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "Wait a minute. You're at 112 Arbor. You're the bylaw guy, ain't you?" I was stunned. "You listen to the show?" "Hell yeah, I listen," Sal boomed, his voice a gravelly roar. "Was over on Chestnut Street last week mudjacking a patio, and the homeowner had you on his garage radio. The bit about the mailbox paint SKU numbers? Genius. My wife and I were crying. Brenda Donaldson's a real piece of work. Had me repaint a whole house once because the beige I used was, and I quote, too sunny. Too sunny. What does that even mean?" I had found an ally. More than an ally. I had found a grizzled veteran of the HOA wars. Sal became my strategic advisor. As he expertly chiseled out the crack and prepared to patch it, he gave me a masterclass in residential combat. "See, here's the thing about these HOAs," he explained, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a dusty glove. "They run on hypocrisy. They hold you to a standard they can't even meet themselves. You gotta find their weakness. Everyone's got one." "Brenda's seems to be a complete lack of a soul," I offered. "Nah, that's her strength," Sal corrected. "I'm talking about real violations. You just gotta know where to look. I've worked on half the houses in this neighborhood. Built Brenda's new deck last summer, as a matter of fact." My ears perked up. "Oh yeah?" "Big ol' thing. Composite wood. Real fancy. Had a hell of a time getting the materials she wanted. She was real specific about the brand of sealant she wanted me to use on the railings. Said it was the only one that held up. Weird thing is, I'm pretty sure it ain't on the approved list in your guy's binder. I had to special order it." My mind started racing. Non-approved materials? From the president herself? "And another thing," Sal said, leaning on his shovel. "Big job like that, adding a whole new structure to the back of the house. You need a county permit for that. Pulling permits is a pain in the ass, but you gotta do it. I asked her about it, and she got real squirrely. Said she'd handle the paperwork. I'd bet you a bucket of grout she never filed one." This was it. This was more than a dandelion. This was the smoking gun. Sal was giving me the coordinates to the Death Star's thermal exhaust port. That evening, after paying Sal, and slipping him an extra $50 for consulting fees, I sat down at my laptop. My heart hammered as I navigated the county's clunky, poorly designed public records website. I typed in Brenda's address. 45 Magnolia Court. I searched for building permits filed in the last 2 years. The search results came back. A plumbing permit for a water heater replacement in 2023, an electrical permit for an panel upgrade in 2024, but nothing else. No deck, no structural additions, nothing. Sal was right. Brenda Donaldson, the high priestess of rules and regulations, the woman who would fine a man for a single weed, had built an entire deck without a permit. It was a violation of HOA bylaws, and more importantly, a violation of county law. I took a screenshot, then another. I dug up the digital copy of the HOA binder and found Appendix C, Approved Building Materials. I did a search for the sealant brand Sal had mentioned. Not on the list. I had her. I had her dead to rights. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the community clubhouse. It was time to take the show on the road. WHOA was about to go live. The Pleasant Valley Meadows Community Clubhouse smelled faintly of stale coffee and quiet desperation. It was a sea of beige walls, beige folding chairs, and beige-wearing residents. But tonight, the room was packed. Word had spread. My nightly broadcasts had turned the most boring event of the year into the hottest ticket in town. People weren't just here to vote on the budget for seasonal plantings. They were here for the season finale. I sat in the third row with Sarah, a USB stick clutched in my sweaty palm. It felt like a tiny plastic hand grenade. Dave from next door gave me a subtle nod. A few other familiar faces from my street offered quiet, encouraging smiles. The resistance was in the room. At the front, Brenda stood behind a flimsy lectern, flanked by Brenda 2 and Brenda 3, who served as her secretary and treasurer. She surveyed the unusually large crowd with a look of smug satisfaction, completely misreading the room. She thought this was a show of support. She thought they were here for her. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice echoing slightly through the clubhouse's cheap sound system. "It's so wonderful to see so many engaged homeowners here tonight. It shows how much we all care about maintaining the standards that make Pleasant Valley Meadows such a desirable place to live." She went through the usual business, the treasurer's report, the landscaping committee update. I could feel the energy in the room sag. This was the bureaucratic rope-a-dope designed to bore everyone into submission before the main event. Finally, she arrived at new business. "As some of you may be aware," she said, her eyes flicking in my direction for a fraction of a second, "there has recently been an incident involving the misuse of public airwaves for the purpose of disseminating association documents in a less than flattering manner. This has created a divisive and immature atmosphere. Therefore, the board proposes a new amendment to our bylaws, Article 13, Section 8. She cleared her throat and read from a paper in front of her. The prohibition of broadcast and public dissemination of association documents. This amendment would prohibit any resident from broadcasting, podcasting, or otherwise publicly distributing the contents of our governing documents, protecting their integrity and preventing further discord. The board recommends a yes vote. This was it, her counterattack, the frank amendment. She was trying to legislate me out of existence. After a few minutes of procedural nonsense, she opened the floor for discussion. My hand shot up. "The board recognizes Frank Miller," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. I walked to the front of the room and stood at the single microphone set up for residents. I took a deep breath. Showtime. "Good evening, everyone," I started, my voice steadier than I felt. I looked at Brenda's proposed amendment. "First, I'd just like to say that I think reading this new rule on my show would be an absolute ratings bonanza." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Brenda's smile tightened. "But that's not why I'm up here," I continued, my tone shifting from humorous to serious. "Brenda's right about one thing. We should all care about the standards that govern our community. We all agreed to them when we moved here. I, for one, have been made intimately aware of those standards over the past few weeks." I pulled a stack of beige envelopes from my jacket pocket. "This one's for my trash can being 10 minutes early. This one is for a dandelion. This one is for a crack in my driveway. I've been held to the letter of the law, and that's fair. Rules are rules." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Brenda talks about rules, about standards, about following the bylaws that we all agreed to, and I agree. So let's talk about Article 9, exterior improvements and alterations, and let's talk about Appendix C, approved building materials. And while we're at it, let's talk about county building permits. A murmur went through the room. Brenda's face, which had been a mask of smug control, began to show the faintest cracks. I walked over to the laptop connected to the projector, which was displaying the HOA budget. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, unplugging their HDMI cable and plugging in my own. I inserted my USB stick. The first image that flashed up on the screen behind Brenda was a screenshot from the county permit website for her address. The search results clearly showed no permit for any structural additions. "This," I announced, my voice booming through the microphone, "is a search for building permits at 45 Magnolia Court. As you can see, there's no permit listed for the beautiful and very large new deck that was built last summer." The whispering in the room grew louder. Brenda was speechless, her mouth slightly agape. "And this," I said, clicking to the next slide, "is a picture of the wood sealant used on that deck's railings, a brand which, according to a search of Appendix C of our own bylaws, is not on the approved materials list." The room was silent now, the kind of ringing silence that follows a loud explosion. Everyone was staring at Brenda. Her carefully constructed world of rules and regulations had just been demolished by a PowerPoint presentation. The enforcer was the biggest rule breaker of them all. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd met her, Brenda Donaldson had nothing to say. Then a voice from the back of the room cut through the tension. It was Dave, my neighbor. He stood up. "I believe we're supposed to be voting on the new amendment," he said loudly and clearly. "I vote no. And furthermore, I'd like to make a motion for a vote of no confidence in our current HOA president, based on the evidence presented of clear and willful violations of the very bylaws she is tasked to enforce." "Seconded!" shouted a woman from the other side of the room. It was a coup. A full-blown suburban coup. The motion was pushed through. Paper ballots were hastily passed out. The result was a landslide. Brenda was voted out. Her two cronies, seeing the writing on the wall, resigned on the spot. As the meeting devolved into a chaotic but cheerful buzz of residents nominating new, more reasonable people for the board, Brenda gathered her papers with trembling hands. She didn't look at anyone. She just walked out the side door, her reign of aesthetic terror finally, blessedly, over. I stood by the microphone, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving me shaky but triumphant. Sarah came up and wrapped her arms around me. "We HOA," she whispered in my ear, "the voice of the people." The great clubhouse coup of 2025, as it came to be known, changed everything. A new HOA board was elected that night, with Dave from next door as the reluctant but sensible new president. Their first official act was to table Brenda's anti-broadcast amendment indefinitely. Their second was to schedule a full review of the entire 300-page book of bylaws with an eye toward removing anything utterly insane. The pot-bellied pig clause, I was assured, was on the chopping block. I became a reluctant neighborhood hero. People who used to just give a polite wave now stopped me to shake my hand when I got the mail. Mr. Peterson, whose lawn Brenda had measured with a ruler, dropped off a bottle of scotch. I was the voice, the bylaw guy, the guy who took on the dragon and won. It was weird. A week later, Dave and the new Architectural Review Committee, a laid-back accountant and a retired art teacher, came over to discuss the antenna situation. We sat in my backyard, drinking iced tea. "Look, Frank," Dave said, "we're not going to make some. You take it down. What Brenda did was ridiculous, but it is pretty big. Is there any kind of compromise we can work out?" It was more than I could have hoped for. We talked it over. I showed them catalogs for less conspicuous designs. We settled on a flagpole antenna, a clever design that looks exactly like a 20-foot flagpole, but secretly works as a highly effective multiband vertical. It would blend in perfectly. I called the only man for the job. Sal showed up the following Saturday, and we spent the afternoon putting up the new antenna. He even brought an American flag for it. He refused any payment beyond a case of cold beer and a promise that he'd be the first person I'd call if I ever needed a deck built. With a permit, of course. That evening, I went up to the shack. The new antenna was hooked up, the SWR meter showing a nearly perfect match. The bands were alive with signals from all over the world. I tuned the dial, and within minutes, I was in a pleasant chat with a fellow operator in northern Brazil. The magic was back. The thrill of pulling a friendly voice from the static, a human connection across thousands of miles, was as pure as ever. Before I shut down for the night, I looked over at the little FM transmitter sitting on my desk. It had served its purpose. Its work was done, but it deserved a proper send-off. I powered it on one last time, turned on the microphone, and brought up the audio. "Good evening, Pleasant Valley Meadows," I said, my voice quiet and calm, no dramatic effects needed. "This is WHOA, signing off. It's been a slice, folks. Remember to check your bylaws, be kind to your neighbors, and for the love of God, don't let anyone tell you your beige is too sunny." I paused, a genuine smile on my face. "This is Frank Miller, clear and listening." I switched off the transmitter, plunging the 88.7 FM frequency back into silence. The only sound in the room was the faint, hopeful hiss of static from my big radio, the sound of a million conversations waiting to happen, of a wide-open world waiting just beyond the horizon. Freedom.